The chapel door slammed as Mira, 24, and trembling, turned toward the aisle lit by winter lightning. Cale, 28 and unyielding, strode through guests frozen in shock. The storm outside clawed at stained glass like it wanted in. Mira said, "Do not do this," yet the words shook like leaves. Cale said, "You are mine," and fury drowned the music. He reached her, scent and heat and terrible resolve, and the world narrowed to teeth and breath. His mark broke skin at her collar, not tender but thunder, and silence crashed. Blood tasted like iron vows, and every eye became a verdict. Mira said, "You chose anger," and he flinched like the truth had teeth. The priest crossed himself, the ring fell, and winter took a breath it never returned. Snow chased them into the narthex like gossip with claws, and Mira pressed a palm to the fresh mark that seared like a verdict. Cale said, "I should have waited," and the confession cracked against stone. She said, "You should have trusted me," and the words hurt worse than the bite. Footsteps gathered behind the door but dared not enter that heat. The city bells tolled midnight, as if the hour wanted witnesses for their ruin. Cale's voice softened, the edge traded for ache, and he said, "I saw him touch your throat." Mira said, "He fixed my necklace," and silence revealed how thin his certainty was. In the echo, their breaths became a clock counting consequences. Outside, thunder stitched the sky shut. Inside, the wound whispered a claim that neither could amputate. The pack arrived not as wolves, but as whispers, their coats steaming in the entry, as men and women shook off winter. Elder Rhea, 50 and iron calm, studied the mark like a verdict etched in red. Rhea said, "An angry bond breaks bones you cannot see." Cale lowered his gaze, and the posture admitted more than words. Mira said, "What does it make me now?" And the question tasted like ash. Rhea said, "Marked is not owned, child, but tethered," and the word coiled around the air. Somewhere the music outside died, and the chapel heart went still. Cale said, "I will answer for it," and promise rang against old stone. Rhea said, "You will heal what you broke, or it will eat both of you alive." In the sacristy, mirrors caught fragments of them like arguments that refused to align. Mira stood rigid, the dress now a banner of something lost, while Cale hovered like guilt with boots. Cale said, "Give me a way to fix it," and the mirrors showed his fear small and human. Mira said, "You do not fix someone by breaking them," and the glass almost fogged with heat. Rhea's voice through the door quieted the storm inside them. Rhea said, 3 nights to balance the bond. No command, only consent. Mira's pulse steadied at the word consent, like a rope thrown to a swimmer. Cale said 3 nights then, and he let the echo hold him accountable. Somewhere the ring still lay on stone, listening. They left through the alley where snow turned to wet ash under city soot, and the cold paired speech to truth. Mira said, "Do not follow unless you can listen," and she walked toward a street that smelled like rain and endings. Cale said, "I will not command you," and the promise tugged against instinct like barbed wire. The mark throbbed in answer under her palm. Neither yes nor no, only insistence. Neon washed their faces in wounded colors, and the night chewed sirens into distant teeth. Rhea watched from the chapel's shadow, a sentinel paid in patience. Rhea said, "Balance or burn," and the words climbed the bricks like ivy. The storm rolled east, but the damage stayed. The city inhaled them, and Act I ended with the ring, unclaimed, listening to stone. Dawn crept in pale and uncertain, finding Mira at the safehouse window, her breath clouding the glass. Cale stood at the threshold with a tray, the scent of tea and bread, trying to replace the memory of blood. Cale said, "Eat, even if you hate me," and the word sat between plea and command. Mira said, "I will eat because I choose," and her tone wrapped around the syllables like armor. Outside, the city thawed with the sound of tires over slush, but inside the air still tasted of last night's vow. Rhea's handwriting on the note beside her read, 3 nights begin now. Cale's hand lingered on the table before pulling back, a restraint that hurt him more than the bite had hurt her. Mira broke bread, and the silence that followed was not war, but watchfulness. The first trial was listening, and it felt like walking barefoot over ice. Mira spoke of the nights she learned to pretend, the way a girl becomes invisible to survive. Cale's eyes softened with each word, the gold dimming to amber. Cale said, "I thought you were unbreakable," and the truth exposed his blindness. Mira said, "I am not something to test," and the words landed like a stone in still water. Ree's voice over the phone offered no comfort, only, "Keep going." Outside, snow slid from the eaves in slow sheets, and the weight of it mirrored the room. They sat without touching, each learning the shape of the other's silence. The training yard was a white canvas under a steel sky, pine shadows stretching like old scars. Rhea moved between them, a metronome of discipline. She said, "Patience is harder than speed," and her voice cut through the cold. Mira pushed through each drill with precision, her boots marking the frost. Cale matched her pace without leading, each movement a rehearsal of respect. Mira said again, and Cale nodded without argument. Frost steamed off their breath, and for a heartbeat, the mark quieted like an animal lulled to sleep. By the time they stopped, sweat had stitched their clothes to their skin, but the air between them was lighter. That night, the safe-house den became a confessional. Rhea sat in the corner, eyes steady, voice like flint. She said, "Name the thing you fear in yourself." Mira's breath shuddered before she said, "I destroy what loves me." Cale's gaze didn't falter when he said, "I am nothing without power." The words hung like smoke, staining everything they touched. Rhea inclined her head, as if marking the moment like an entry in a ledger. Outside, the snow returned, each flake a small surrender. The mark burned briefly, not in hunger, but in recognition. Neither looked away. The third trial was held beneath the city's sky, where wind carved honesty into bone. Rhea said, "Choose a boundary and keep it," before leaving them with the rooftop door ajar. Mira's choice came without pause. No touch tonight. Cale nodded, the restraint tightening in his chest. They stood side by side, the city sprawling beneath, lights like quiet witnesses. Their breath formed clouds that tangled but never met. Conversation drifted from weather to childhood, each memory handed like an offering. The mark was still, listening. Dawn's first color broke at the horizon, painting them both in the same pale gold. The morning after the third trial, Mira woke to the hollow thump of Cale's boots pacing the safe-house hall. The air was thick with something unsaid. Ree's voice carried from the doorway, low and edged. She said, "The council demands to see the mark." Cale's shoulders tightened, the muscle in his jaw flexing. Mira stepped into view, hair unbound, the bite visible like a brand of defiance. Cale said they will not touch her, but the conviction carried an old violence. Mira said, "I will speak for myself," and the statement rang like tempered steel. Outside, frost glittered on the street, deceptive in its beauty. Inside, the scent of wolf was sharp enough to taste. The day had already chosen to be cruel. The council chamber was colder than the street outside, all stone and shadow, torches burning without warmth. Elders lined the dais, eyes sharp with judgment. Elder Marek said, "You marked in anger," and his words struck like a gavel. Cale said, "I will bear the consequence," but his gaze never left Mira. She stepped forward, the sound of her boots loud in the silence. Mira said, "This mark does not make me silent," and the air in the room shifted. A younger elder's eyes flickered with respect. Rhea stood at the back, still as a sentinel. Snow drifted past high windows, each flake catching fire in the torchlight before vanishing. They left the chamber with the weight of unseen eyes trailing them. On the stone steps, Cale's breath fogged like smoke from a dying fire. Mira said, "You think this ends with their verdict?" He said, "It ends when you decide." The street below shimmered with ice, and the market's muted hum was an intrusion from another life. A boy ran past with a loaf of bread, laughter echoing against the stone. Cale's hand twitched toward Mira but stopped. The mark pulsed once, then stilled, as if listening. Above them the council's banners snapped in the wind, red against a sky the color of iron. That evening the market smelled of roasting chestnuts and wet wool, the kind of warmth that made strangers forget the cold. Mira moved between stalls, eyes scanning trinkets and spices, each color a rebellion against the monochrome day. Kale kept pace behind her, silent but alert. Mira said, "Do you follow to guard me or control me?" He said, "I'm still learning the difference." She paused at a stall with silver chains, fingers brushing one shaped like a crescent moon. The merchant, an older woman, glanced at Kale and said, "Some bonds are forged twice to be kept." Mira's gaze lingered on the chain, but she walked on. The mark burned faintly under her coat. Back at the safe house, the third night of the bond trials began without ceremony. Rhea poured tea for herself, her presence a quiet reminder of the rules. She said, "This night is for choice." Mira sat across from Kale at the low table, the space between them heavy with possibility. Kale said, "I will not ask for forgiveness." Mira said, "Good. I would not give it yet." The mark warmed, but this time, it felt like a question. Outside, wind clawed at the shutters, searching for a way in. Inside, the two of them held each other's gaze until the tea cooled and the hour passed without touch. It was a victory neither celebrated aloud. The first scream came from the alley below, slicing through the quiet like glass breaking. Mira was at the window before Kale could move. Rhea's voice, sharper than fear, said, "Stay inside." But the scent hit Kale's senses like a blow, packed blood, fresh and wrong. He was down the stairs in seconds, Mira on his heels despite Rhea's warning. In the alley, snow was marred with deep crimson, and a young wolf lay gasping. His eyes found Mira and widened in shock. He said, "It was your brother." The words crashed through her like a blade she didn't see coming. Kale's head snapped toward her, confusion and suspicion mingling. The mark burned hot, not from possession, but from a truth it recognized before she did. Inside the safe house, the injured wolf lay on the table, breath ragged. Mira's hands pressed to the wound, heat of panic in her touch. Rhea worked swiftly with needle and salve, her expression stone. Kale paced, voice low but jagged. "Why would your brother attack his own?" Mira's reply was barely a whisper. "He wouldn't." The wolf's eyes fluttered, a ghost of a smile tugging his mouth. "He wore your scent," he murmured before darkness claimed him. Silence fell heavy, the kind that grows teeth. Kale met Rhea's gaze, both knowing this was no accident, it was a message. Outside, snow fell harder, as if trying to bury the night's truth before morning. Rhea led them to the archive beneath the chapel, a place smelling of old paper and silver. Shelves rose high, scrolls and leather-bound tomes stacked like sleeping sentinels. She unrolled a map marked with crimson threads. "Your family line was bound to the Alpha seat generations ago," she said to Mira. Kale's gaze flicked to her, realization dawning like a blade unsheathed. Mira's pulse pounded in her ears. "And my brother?" she asked. Rhea's answer was a whisper that carried like thunder. "He was promised to lead, if the current Alpha fell." The mark on Mira's skin throbbed, each beat echoing the trap tightening around them both. The storm hit just before dusk, snow whipping sideways against the chapel walls. Mira stood at the balcony, city lights vanishing under white. Kale joined her, his breath a warm cloud near her cheek. "If your brother wants the seat, he'll come for me," he said. Mira turned, the mark aching between them like a warning bell. "Then he'll have to come through me," she replied. Lightning flashed, illuminating his conflicted expression, love tangled with doubt. The wind howled, as if carrying her brother's name. Somewhere in the dark below, footsteps crunched in fresh snow, slow and deliberate. They found the footprints leading away from the chapel gates, deep and steady despite the storm. Rhea armed them with silver blades and a single warning. "This is no longer trial, it's war." Mira's grip on the hilt was sure, the cold biting her fingers. Kale walked at her side, every step matched, his earlier doubt buried under resolve. The wind erased their tracks as quickly as they made them. Somewhere ahead, the trail would end in truth or blood. Mira felt the mark's heat spread across her collar, a living reminder that her choices now carried the weight of more than her own life. She did not look back. The forest swallowed sound, every breath clouding in the freezing dark. Mira led, her blade low, Kale shadowing her steps. The tracks curved toward a frozen clearing, lit by the storm's silver light. Ree's warning echoed, "Trust nothing you see first." A figure emerged, tall, familiar, wrong. "Sister," he said, voice rich with warmth that didn't reach his eyes. Mira's fingers tightened on the hilt. "Why?" she asked, and the word was a fracture in the air. He smiled, slow and dangerous. "You wear his mark." Kale shifted, ready to strike, but Mira's arm barred his way. Snow began to fall harder, hiding edges and intentions. The mark on her skin burned like a fuse, counting down to something inevitable. The air between them was a drawn bowstring. Mira's brother stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow. "The alpha seat was mine by blood," he said. Kale's voice was a low growl. "Then claim it in the circle, not from shadows." Her brother's gaze flicked to Kale with disdain. "I don't fight pretenders." Mira said, "You'll fight me," and steel whispered as she raised her blade. His smile cracked into something colder. "Then bleed for him." Around them, shadows shifted, wolves in half-form, watching. The forest seemed to breathe in, holding the moment still. Ree's silhouette appeared at the tree line, silent but ready. The first strike was hers, fast, angled, forcing him to block rather than strike. Steel rang sharp in the frozen air. He twisted, trying to unbalance her, but Kale moved in, intercepting the second swing, meant for her ribs. They fought as one, an unspoken rhythm forged from trial nights. Her brother snarled, a sound more beast than man, and drove them back toward the tree line. Snow sprayed underfoot, moonlight flashing on steel. The wolves around them paced, eyes bright, the air thick with the scent of blood, not yet spilled. Mira's breath burned in her lungs, but her grip didn't falter. The mark's heat surged, lending strength she didn't question. He lunged, forcing her to the ground, blade inches from her throat. Kale's roar split the night, his blade knocking the weapon away in a shower of sparks. Mira rolled free, boots cutting deep lines in the snow. She came up behind him, blade at his back, breath shaking but steady. "Yield," she said, the word a command she hadn't meant to use. He froze, head turning just enough to meet her eyes. "You sound like him," he whispered. The wolves stopped pacing. Every ear turned toward them. Kale stepped to her side, close but not touching. Ree's voice carried through the clearing. "Choice, Mira, not instinct." Mira lowered her blade, the mark's fire dimming to an ember. Her brother's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. Kale's eyes flicked to her. A silent question. She said, "He lives, under exile." Rhea stepped forward, binding the decree with silver thread around his wrists. The wolves melted back into the trees, the air easing its grip on their chests. Her brother's gaze softened for a heartbeat. "You sound like Mother," he murmured before Rhea led him away. The clearing felt larger without him, the snow falling quieter. Kale turned to her. "You chose," he said. She nodded, the mark warm, not burning. For the first time, it felt like hers as much as his. Dawn found the clearing empty, but for the scars carved into the snow. Mira stood at its edge, watching light bleed across the horizon. Kale approached, boots crunching softly. "It's over," he said, though his tone carried no certainty. She shook her head. "It's quieter, not over." The mark was warm, steady, like a heartbeat settling after a sprint. Rhea joined them, her cloak dusted in frost. "Peace is a season," she said, "not a promise." Forest exhaled, releasing them back to the path. As they walked toward the chapel, the wind carried no threat, only the smell of pine and the faintest trace of ash from what had burned between them. The chapel doors opened to a city waking under frost. Inside, the pack waited, some with relief in their eyes, others with questions they didn't voice. Kale stepped forward, addressing them first. The threat is gone. The line remains unbroken. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Mira moved to stand beside him, her presence making the words truth. "We choose peace," she said, and the air shifted lighter. Rhea watched from the side, her expression unreadable, but her stance less rigid. The mark pulsed once, not in command but in answer, as if recognizing the weight of shared authority. Outside, bells began to toll, calling the day into being. By midday, the market was alive again, the air filled with the smell of baking bread and wood smoke. Mira walked with Kale between stalls, their pace unhurried. A vendor pressed an apple into her hand with a quiet for the alpha's mate, and she didn't correct him. Kale noticed, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "You didn't argue," he said. She bit into the apple, juice sweet on her tongue. "Not everything needs a fight." They paused at a jeweler's stall, the same one from before, and her fingers brushed the crescent moon pendant. Kale didn't speak, but his hand rested lightly on the counter beside hers. The mark stayed quiet, almost content. That evening, they sat in the safe-house den, fire crackling low. Rhea joined them for tea, her voice softer than they'd ever heard. "3 nights were for balance," she said. "But balance shifts. You must keep chasing it." Mira met Kale's gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. He reached across the table, not touching her hand but close enough for warmth to bridge the space. "Then we chase it together," he said. Rhea nodded once, satisfied. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, as if the storm had finally learned restraint. The mark stayed warm, not burning, alive, but at peace. Later, alone, Mira stood at the window, watching snow blanket the street in quiet silver. Kale joined her without a word, his reflection beside hers in the glass. She said, "The mark isn't a chain anymore." He answered, "Then what is it?" Her hand rose to her collar, fingers brushing the healed skin. "It's a reminder." They stood there, the city lights flickering beneath the snowfall, neither needing to speak further. The world outside was still uncertain, but in that moment, it felt far away. The mark warmed once, then faded, and the night held them steady in its quiet. Winter's last moon hung low over the city, bathing the streets in silver. Mira walked ahead of Kale, the sound of her boots muffled by new snow. "There's no council, no trial, no war tonight," she said. He smiled faintly. "Then what's left?" Her answer was a glance over her shoulder, eyes catching the moonlight. "Living with what we've built." The mark under her collar stayed quiet, no longer a wound, no longer a brand, simply part of her. Kale caught up, their shoulders brushing, the silence between them warm. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not in warning but in recognition. The chapel was quiet when they entered, only candlelight breathing against the walls. Mira walked to the altar, her fingers brushing the worn wood. "We began here," she said softly. Kale joined her, placing his hand over hers, without force. "We can end here too, if that's what you want." She looked at him, the past flickering behind her eyes. "No," she said, "this is where we start again." Rhea's shadow appeared briefly in the doorway, then faded, leaving them alone. Outside, the first hints of dawn pressed against the stained glass, painting the stone in muted color. By mid-morning the pack gathered in the courtyard, frost crunching under their boots. Mira stood before them, Kale at her side. "I'm not your alpha," she began, "but I will stand beside him, and beside all of you." Kale's voice followed, firm but without dominance. "We protect each other now, no more marks made in anger." Murmurs of approval threaded through the crowd. Rhea stood off to the side, her small nod carrying more weight than any cheer. Above, sunlight broke fully, catching in the breath of every wolf present, turning it to steam and gold. Afternoon brought quiet to the safe house. Mira sat at the table, sketching the crescent moon pendant from memory. Kale leaned against the doorway, watching her without speaking. "You can sit," she said without looking up. He took the chair opposite, leaning forward. You still want it? She nodded. It reminds me of choice. His hand reached across, this time finding hers, no barrier. The mark warmed faintly under her collar, in rhythm with their joined hands. Outside the snow melted in slow rivulets, winter loosening its grip. Night returned, calm and clear, stars sharp against the dark. On the rooftop, Mira stood at the edge, city lights flickering below. Kale joined her, close enough to share breath. She said, You marked me in anger, but I stayed. He looked at her, the weight of their history in his gaze. And now? Her eyes held his, steady. Now you can't live without me. Silence wrapped around them, not empty but full. In the final breath before the wind shifted, the mark warmed once more, then stilled, as if finally at rest.